Welcome back to the Derby Rotten Scoundrels, aka Ohio River Valley. Sarah and Gwen were our members, and it's probably been, what, 5 years ago that you guys lived up here, or around that time? And then they moved. 9 years ago?
I think it was longer, yes.
Wow, okay, time flies. They moved to Florida and decided to open their own publishing business. They had been published up when we were up here. They were both in our two anthologies. And then I think both of you had your own books out. I know Gwen had Circle of
Dishonor.
Dishonor, yeah. And I know you had stories published.
I had a number of short stories published, and then I had my vampire book published, the story of the vampire and her battle with the homeowners association.
Yes.
It came out right at the same time as all of the different
a fun one.
Sexy vampire stories. Ooh. And it's like, people wrote and said, well, this is very good characterization, but if you're looking for something torrid, this isn't it. And my first publisher, Pill Hill, when she got it, she did the cover, then she promoted it. And I said, oh my God, she's promoted it as a lesbian romance. And then later on, I realized I'd written a lesbian romance. Certainly enough to qualify. But yes. And then, and Gwen will get into this more. Our publisher closed its doors, and then we were left with orphan books. Plus, Gwen had a new book that was actually ready for review by the editor and such. And it's like, well, I was about ready to go here. And she sent it back. And so she sent it back. The editor did. And my mother was like, well, why don't you just publish these things yourselves? And, well, I rarely listen to my mother, but I did. And now people are like, oh, they're publishers. And I'm like, it's like, and of course, they also think we're like rolling in the dough, which is, I'm working on it. We're working on it. Okay. So I don't know if you wanted to do more introduction or if I need to give this to Gwen, because we have a PowerPoint, which means I guess I'm going to have to ask to share the screen.
I'm going to turn it over to you guys because you know what you're doing. And
y'all, if you think I know what I'm doing with Zoom, you see, there's the technical thing. I'm going, can you hear me? Because that is an important thing.
Okay, take it away.
All right. Let's see, and back to Zoom. There's got to be an option on here for share screen.
There towards the bottom. Sorry, I had to
Post disable participant screen sharing. Yeah.
Oh.
I can try again.
Yeah, I just did something. Try again.
Oh, it's giving me options for which screen I want to share. That's probably a good idea. One of those is, well, I work from home, and one of them is the, okay, I'm going to give it to Gwen, who understands the actual PowerPoint better than I do. So she's much smarter than I am. Yeah, right. Okay, hang on. Don't yank too hard. That thing will come out.
As you can see, we are still the two-headed monster. Anyway, on the subject of how we went from writing to publishing, Sarah was talking about Pill Hill and how they had done our books originally, and these were the covers they chose for them. We had almost no input into it. They asked us what we wanted, then ignored us. but we were perfectly happy just being writers. And then all of a sudden, we were busy trying to learn the author's job, which is not as easy as it might sound, because once you write a book, then there's a whole different process. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the contracts and the revision and the promotion that they expect from authors. We managed to get through the deadlines and get everything done. And then just as my second book was ready to launch, the publisher closed.
Which happens a lot.
Yes, and that does happen quite a lot.
Okay, just scroll it down and click on the next one.
The first thing we did was form an LLC, because Sarah and I, as a couple, at that time couldn't be married. So to protect each other's interest in our books, we'd already set up a company. What we had to do once the publisher closed was go in and discuss what we were going to do from then on. And the first thing we had to get was our book rights back. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried to get book rights back, but it's not an easy process. In fact, they kind of go out of their way to make it difficult with a lot of publishers. Sarah and I, when we were discussing forming the press, decided that we didn't want to do that to authors. So the only thing we ask for when we publish a book is for the rights for first publication for 1 year. After that, all the rights revert back to the author, except our right to keep it in print.
What about books? Didn't you say you were going to extend novels?
But we had to do that with everything. And for a novel, we decided that with the anthologies, 1 year for a short story is fine. But we went for 3 years for rights for a novel. And that allows us the time to actually make some money from the book before it goes back to the author. But it also leaves them with the option of, if we close down, they have their rights back. I started out searching for a new publisher, and that was its own adventure. And at the time, 5 Star was interested in my book, and I decided to turn them down, which was probably the best decision I ever made, because 6 months after they'd offered me a contract, they quit publishing mysteries.
Oh.
So I would have been back in the same boat with no publisher.
Okay.
And that's pretty much when we decided that we were going to publish it ourselves. And then a bunch of the other Pill Hill authors got in touch with us and said, hey, we heard that you were going to do this. Would you publish ours? So we did publish a couple of them. And we did it before we did ours, and we have to learn how to make a lot of mistakes with theirs.
They're not kind.
It was very helpful to have somebody else's book to deal with first. And of course, when we decided to publish, we had to repurpose the LLC and expand what we were doing with it.
But since we were the only partners, that wasn't as hard.
Yes,
as it
we were the only partner, so we got to do it. And then we got to look at software that we were going to need for doing this. And the first thing was the Adobe Acrobat and InDesign. And Sarah's mother, who had lobbied so hard for us to do this, actually sprang for the cost of InDesign for us so that we could get started. Then I had to come up with accounting software for it. And 2 other pieces of software I find essential are Canva, which allows me to do the ads and put several books into one photograph and put the nice backgrounds with the books, and Publisher Rocket, which helps me with things like keywords and SEO and all of that data stuff that is so important with everything that we do. And then I had to get the mechanics of creating a book down, and I'll talk about these more later, but the categories that are most important are the formatting and layout, the cover design, the book blurbs, and the metadata and keywords. Those are the basics. If you can master those, you can publish a book. If you can stumble your way through them, you can publish your book. But it is a learning process, and I am still learning every day on what needs to be done. And once I got the idea of how to put a book together, I had to figure out how the business of publishing worked. And the first thing was working with the other authors, because we started out working, like I said, with other books first. And we had to come up with the contracts and, you know, who was going to print the books and how they'd be distributed. We had to learn all about awards and reviews that are available to independent presses, because not every thing is available, although some of it is becoming more available now than it was when we started. And then deciding about returnable and non-returnable books. We started out with everything being non-returnable because we simply could not afford to take the loss. And you're always risking a loss when the books are returnable. This past couple of years, we've been doing a mix of the two. Our own books are returnable. Most of the other novels are returnable. Your book's the only collection that's returnable.
Okay.
Then there's Monster Matt.
And then there's Monster Matt, who is returnable and non-returnable and absolutely insane to work with. He writes his books on his Apple phone.
Oh, dear Lord.
And he does his artwork by hand and has a friend who scans it for him.
Oh, my goodness.
And the only reason that we work with him at all is because we love him. It's
Oh.
just,
That's nice.
That's
He
insane.
sells his books by hand and does very
Yes.
well at it.
but he goes to more events and sells more books by hand than most people do through distribution and their own work as well. He is well known in the horror community and has had things like Adam West reading the section on Batman at conventions.
My goodness.
This kind of stuff. So he sells a lot of books, but putting one of his books together is something I refuse to do more than once every other year. Because it literally takes me 6 months to take this jumble of things he sends me and turn it into a book.
Goodness.
And I wouldn't do it for anyone else. Publicity and social media are a learning process that changes probably weekly. What works one week does not work the next. And it doesn't work the same with each book. So every time that you do a new book, you're coming up with new ways to promote it. And getting the books in the bookstores for independent authors, this is one of the hardest tasks. And it's the same with the small presses. Getting your books in the bookstore is a challenge. You're either doing one of two things. You contract with the bookstore. Barnes & Noble has a form that you fill out. Some of the other bookstores that are chains, you can also fill out a form with. With the independent bookstores, you work with them individually, and usually I visit the store and work out some kind of deal with them to carry our books. And it really helps if you have a relationship with the bookstores that carry them. The other side of it is the competitors and readers. Believe it or not, the big presses are not my competitors. They have an audience. They're going to have places on the bookshelves in every store. I don't have to worry about them. They're going to do their thing and they're not going to notice me. But there are a lot of small presses, independent authors, self-published authors that are my competitors. And sometimes I find it better to work with them than against them. I've actually set up things where that we're working with a group of other authors or other small presses to do events. And it cuts the cost for all of us and also allows us to pick up more of each other's audience. So that works pretty well. But you really have to understand that, you know, you are competing with other independents, not with the big guys. Which means that when it comes to price points, you're going to always want to go for the lower end of the scale for how you're selling books, because if you try to price them the way that they do a John Grisham novel, you're going to lose. They'll buy John Grisham.
And I've known people who
The
ruined
book
their sales
categories
that way.
was a learning curve that is still something I have to work at, because I don't know if you're aware that when you put a book into the ISBN database, you're allowed 2 categories. I can do historical, I can do mystery, I can do horror, but you have to choose just 2. But Amazon has changed the game, because they'll let you do the 2 categories when you enter one. But if you actually go and look at their smaller databases, you can find a whole bunch of categories that are closer to what you write with a smaller group of people following them, that you have a better chance of getting a bestseller in. And if you send them the exact sequence that you want those categories in, they'll let you do up to 7. So I can go for, historical mystery, cozy, the time period, and break it down to exactly where I want that book to appear. And it gives me a much better shot at having it make the top 100 and actually get into the algorithm to be read. So it's an important thing to know. Even if you're a writer, you may be able to do that, to write them and say you'd like it listed this way, especially if you're working with a smaller press. Finding the ideal reader. We publish mystery and horror, and sometimes a combination of the 2. So finding who reads the books is very different from the cozy series that Sarah and I write to the rather darker series that I write in Kentucky. It's also different for horror authors or the funny horror authors. So you're dealing with a lot of different moving parts, which means that we have to have more than one mailing list, because I have a mailing list that just promotes our stuff. Occasionally, if there's another mystery writer, I'll send that along with it in my email, but I don't really list the horror authors in my newsletter because it's of no use to me. On the other hand, Sarah is working on a mailing list with Strangely Funny, which is a series of books that's all short stories and has an appeal to a particular type of reader. Which brings us to the subject of book content and the editor's job, and I'm going to turn this over to Sarah.
Okay. Yes, that's the fun part. Okay, well, it's more glamorous, I guess. The editor and everyone, goes, oh, we can send the book to her. This gets interesting because every once in a while they'll figure out what my actual normal email is, which is okay for some of them. Others, I'm like, okay. So, book content, the editor's job. All right, content, anthologies, story collections, novels, and novellas. Okay, first off, an anthology is a group of stories, and this is how it's generally defined. With anthologies, you have stories by different authors that you usually gather around a theme of some sort. You guys basically put the stuff together under bourbon. And with Strangely Funny, I'm looking for paranormal stories that are also funny. And and actually Strangely Funny is our flagship, yes, series, because is it going to be book 10 next year? It's going to be numbered 9, but there's going to be 10 of them because we had a 2.5. All right. Story collections are generally done by one author, or in your case, it's actually a group of authors, but you belong to one, one unit. When payment happens, if you have a story collection, it all goes to like paying one, check. With anthologies, it's its own thing. Novel and novellas. The book. novellas have actually recently become more popular than they used to be because they're very good for ebooks. A lot of the time, if you're sitting there reading on a Kindle and it's short, that's actually less unwieldy for the reader. So we have those. So that's kind of a definition thing. All right. Collecting and preparing an anthology. Calling for submissions. Okay. I actually have listed Raylan.com under its own thing. I will mention another one later, but Raylan. Basically, it posts calls for submissions in multiple genres, different anthologies, magazines. They'll even sometimes tell you about novel openings. Sometimes Raylan goes on vacation, but you know. And he actually has a special thing about anthologies where if you're not paying a lot, he wants you to actually put a disclaimer in your call of submission so that the reader knows, well, the readers who are your authors know that they're not going to be rolling in dough from this, which, by the way, for an anthology rarely happens. I'll explain that later. Okay, mailing lists. That first one is the Short Mystery Fiction Society. That's a good place to put, you know, if you're doing a mystery anthology, good place to put it. Sisters in Crime lists, another good place. I've, you know, trolled there before and gotten some good submissions. For History and Horror Oh My, I actually had a couple of people whose stories had been shortlisted for the Agathas, and I was like, yes, that was a good selling point. And then there's websites. There's your own. If you're a publisher, you want to put it on your own site. If you're doing horror, horrortree.com actually will list calls for submissions. Duotrope.com, which is kind of like Raylan. It posts a bunch of the stuff. I really think particularly if you're looking for less experienced writers or writers who kind of do it more for the love or whatever, or people that don't expect you to pay them a ginormous amount of money, Raylan works better. You know, we may hit the big one someday, but a lot of the time you're going to have beginning writers. And then, of course, you have the pleasure actually of being their first experience. All right. Anthologies, the slush pile. Hope you like reading. Okay, ta-da, you've received submissions. You acknowledge them first off. Hi, we got your story. You read the story. If it's written badly, you're not obligated to finish it. You know, if you are like, oh my God, this sucks, you do not have to finish it. You just tell them it doesn't fit your needs. You know, sometimes, you know, if you actually have a piece of advice to offer them, you can go ahead and do that. They don't always take that well, or they will think that if they fix it, they can send it to you again. And a lot of the time, if I've said no, I meant no. I have had ones where I responded to the author and said, if you fix this, I will publish it. Okay. When it comes down to accepting or rejecting stories, honest to God, it's best to know how many stories you're willing to include in the book in the first place. It actually helps because, like, for example, for Strangely Funny, which is our biggest anthology in terms of people sending stuff in, because horror writers are a little bit of a different breed. Mystery writers are more business-like. Horror writers, a lot of them just want their story published, and they want you to send them a copy of the book. You know. Anyway. So knowing how many there are and knowing, you know, what the contents, how they will blend together, you know, is good. Disposition message. This is where you either send them the story, but, you know, there have been a couple of times, like I said, that I've said, look, part of the problem is this. We actually get submissions, and I mean this quite literally, from all over the world for Strangely Funny. And there's been like one or two times I've actually had to say, you need to have a better command of English. I have an idea of what you meant by this story, but the thing is, I'm not willing to rewrite someone else's story. Or you send them the, hey, we'd like to include your story in this. Here's the contract. And you send them a copy of the contract, or you tell them, we're working on the contract now. And I have a spreadsheet that says whether or not I sent them the contract. Okay. Now we come to editing the anthology. You choose your order of stories. You need to lead strong. This is the system I use. I want to lead with a good story because I want them, you know, particularly with that preview function that you have on, you know, Amazon. I want a good story to be there as a selling point so that they'll want to read the rest of it, because your stories, sometimes you'll get all gems, and then sometimes you'll get ones that are gems and then pretty good. Semi-precious. Semi-precious, yes, that's a good word. Semi-precious gems. You'll have your diamonds, and then you'll have, you know, your attractive amethysts. Okay, you want to finish strong. At least I like to finish strong. I don't want to peter out at the end of the book. Not too many similar stories in a row. If you have, you know, for example, if I have more than one story with werewolves, I'm not going to put them together. I did actually have in one of the anthologies 2 stories for Bigfoot because that was fair. You know. With mystery stories for the history and horror one, I had 2 different World War II. They uncovered the spy stories, and I had to choose one because I decided there's too many time periods. So I chose one of the stories, but you know, I had like another one that was World War II, but not uncovering a Nazi spy one. So I just didn't put them close to each other. I'm probably going on too much as usual. Putting them in a document is where the fun really starts. I said dropping all the cats in one sack. Yes, that is exactly what it's like. These people send it to you from their computer. They all used who knows what software. I generally ask for an attached document.
It's not their iPhone.
And at least it's not their iPhone, yes. Because they will send that to you in an email. Never mind how we know this. And so a lot of the time you're going to have to sit there, you're going to have to put them together. There's going to be hinky things that happen where you have to deal particularly with tabbing. Oh my God. And then you're going to discover stuff like the author decided he would do the 5 spaces. Okay, you don't do this. Please don't do this. I don't care what the hell your English teacher told you back in the 80s, okay, or the 70s, or anything. That was before electronic publication of stuff, where even the formatting for the print is done electronically. In other words, it does not fly. Let me put it that way. It's like, no, we need tabs. And you'll go in, you'll put the stories together. We had one pirate story one time, ghost pirate, that, you know, basically we could not, and then the author wanted to blame us, and it's like, I'm sorry, but you know, you're the one that submitted this. And it isn't fitting in with the other stories. All of theirs are fine. You know, your story has a problem because it's you. No, I didn't do that to him. But yes, it's like basically you have a bunch of different creatures and you have to make them get along so you can, you know, proceed. Cleaning up the copy. Okay, you're going to do proofreading. You're going to do a lot of proofreading. You're also going to do crap like, how many times did they use the word really on this page? Or like. And if you know, and honest to God, I will, you know, prune those sons of bitches. Sometimes I will use a different word. I'm sorry. Sorry for those of you who might have been offended by a term that probably some of you used in your stories when you sent them to me. So, all right. And the first formatting, because basically you're going to be the first person to straighten it out when you are, you know, before you give it to the publishing arm, which is coming soon. You clean up the copy, you do the proofreading, you basically try to get it all to hang together. You send the galley to the readers, preferably in a form they can't correct, because I've had this happen. They will go in and they'll try to fix it on the page. I don't know what they have and haven't done. But by the time we're at the galley, it's like, no, you're not making major changes. because it's going to go, because by that time we're talking PDF. And so we sent it in PDF for this reason. It's because it's harder for them to do. They can put those little comment things on it. Like, this is wrong. Or I didn't mean to put it this way, which is really, you know, or sometimes it's like, I don't work for these people anymore. Can you put it like this in the bio? Because I've had that happen. I just had another book published. Could you list this instead of this? And it's like, yeah, we'll try to fit that in. And sometimes
Sarah,
yo,
can I interrupt you?
yes, you may.
Because I've got is there a certain point when you're looking at the manuscript
Uh-huh.
where these kind of editorial issues tell you, I don't want to take this manuscript? I mean, what's the balance between, I like the story, but there are so many sort of editorial formatting things to fix, I don't want to deal with it.
Okay. If we already have a contract from the person, we're going to publish it. Honestly, if we have a contract, we're going to publish it, and it says right there in the contract that I can make changes that are necessary for like formatting and for grammar or whatever. I have occasionally, and before this particular stage, sent it back to the author and said, look, I'm looking at this, and I need you to figure out if you want to do this or this, or if you have a better suggestion. You know, but
Okay.
at the point, but basically, if I have a contract, it's like, no, we're going to publish it. You know, if it's been signed.
But right, but before you get, you're going to make a decision to do a contract or not with that person. So before
Right.
you even get there,
Oh,
when
okay.
you're deciding, do I want to publish or not? How much do those kind of editorial issues color your decision?
Okay. Okay. If I see a lot of problems in terms of repair needed to the story or to just the language, I don't accept the story.
Okay.
I have gotten fairly good over the last few years I have a level of aggravation meter in my head in terms of correcting stuff. Now, sometimes you will get either factual or they have, you know, made a mistake in terms of how they did something, or you think that the readers might question something. For example, the introduction in our last Mardi Gras compilation, I was kind of not convinced with how, well, basically we had a disagreement on how fast cyanide works. I'm like, well, I got a number of books on poisons because it's, you know, I'm a poison enthusiast. It is kind of a hobby of mine. Oh, it can take this long to kill. No, it's fast. You know? So but it involved chemists. So we kind of said, okay, what if the chemist figured out a way to slow down its release into the body? You know, type of thing. And then we worked around it that way, but I have actually sent things where I've said, if you can fix this, I will publish it.
Okay.
Let's see. Usually with the galley, they'll come back, they'll tell you stuff, you fix it again. And then in my case, I give it to the publishing arm if I have one, which I do. And because it is its own issue problem. And let me see. Oh, yes. Let us go on to novels and collections. Similar in the beginning, but different in process. Okay. Call for submissions. First off, you're going to have a reading window because otherwise you will get bunches of books every day. Okay, maybe not every day, but you're going to get them like once a week if you don't have like a window where you say we are accepting novel submissions for X length of time. And also be specific about what you do and don't want. I will tell you that there are people with trunk novels who send their stuff anyway. But most of them are good and actually do want to follow the guidelines. If this is your first or second rodeo, as in terms of publishing books and publishing anthologies, the venues I listed before, you can actually pretty much say, we're open for novels right now in those venues. honestly, for, the last 6 or 7 years, we haven't really needed to advertise that we were selling books. If anthology authors like you, they may query you about their longer projects. This is flattery at its finest. Let me see. Oh, Nightmare Noir, that was one of our anthology authors. Rosalind Barden's Sparky of Bunker Hill and the Cold Kid Case. That was, and there's a follow-up that she's submitted to us already.
That I'm in the process
That
of
Gwen is
reading.
in the process of reading. But a lot of the time, if an author likes you, they will try and see if you want their book. But that takes them getting a little bit used to you. And the other thing is a lot of small presses are, fold very quickly. Either they're going to, sink or they're going to swim. So we're kind of splashing along. But so at any rate, at this point, I will actually get books outside of the time period that we said we were going to read them. Although sometimes I will consider it if it's someone I know. Another author we had was Rochelle Dillon. She only published one story with us, and then she's like, "Hey, would you be interested in this?" Which was her arithmophobia, which she took the first 9 numbers and basically did a story based on each of them. It was really kind of interesting to edit. Now that was an author collection where she basically, okay, all right. An advantage over with novels and collections, your advantage over anthologies. The material will arrive in one document unless you're a monster Matt. In which case he does it on his phone. It's actually his Monster Minute that was on a podcast that these other people were doing. So you're getting a Monster Minute and he sends you pictures and it narrates multiple documents. And no clashes between software versions. Disadvantages of novels. Instead of processing a document in bytes where you can go through and say, okay, here was the first story, it's good. Second story, it's good. Third story, need to fix this. You're dealing with one long document, which will also require more continuity checks for consistency and stuff, plot holes, etc. With short story subs, you have the option to not publish the story. If I look at it and it's got problems, then it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to take it. I have, 70 other things I could put here. If it has a problem section, you need to send it back to the author to rewrite. I was on the receiving end of this as an author. Of the, I want you to fix this, type of stuff. Paying authors. The contract should specify the type of payment, flat rate, royalties, possibly in advance. All right, if you offer royalties for an anthology, you'll probably pay the authors pro rata, which is probably something you should stick in the contract. Each one of them will get a share of the author's cut. It's like there were 12 stories in it, so each of you gets a 12th of whatever percentage the authors were going to get from the overall royalties. Paying anthology authors is best done in electronic form, because if you send checks, you will pay postage, which keeps rising. But the other thing is if you have authors outside the United States, if you send them a check, I've actually had authors like in Britain say, the conversion thing pretty much took away any, reward I would have gotten from this. So I usually use PayPal, although I have to admit I've started to look at other forms of, payment, because PayPal is a little big for its britches in terms of what it, wants to do. Just as a side note, your royalties for story collections and novels will be the largest in the first year, generally when the book is new. And then I have here with advances, why we offer one for anthology authors. I spent a lot of time before I had my first book published, submitting and getting both short stories published. It is not unusual for, if you're like one of 20 authors, to have an anthology cut of cut of the cut being less than $1. So with Strangely Funny and with pretty much our anthologies up till now, we have offered a $5 advance on royalties and a copy of the book. But the $5 advance is because really for a lot of years, they're going to be, nickel and diming their way on to the $5. And then we have a second thing that says that, basically we're not going to mail anything until we have $3 to send. And shorts, this is why frequently if you can, go to like, Alfred Hitchcock or something where they're actually going to pay you per word, you're going to make more money. But if you're a beginning writer who needs to actually learn how publishing works, and the big thing that you want is a copy of the book and to be able to say, I'm in this book, and maybe submit it for a Derringer, then that's good. Now, I ramble a lot. I am going to give it back to Gwen because we are now back to the mechanics of book creation. And it's a duty, I have to admit, I am not desirous of being involved in it any more than I have to.
How much time do we have left? Because I don't want to run over.
About 20
I
minutes.
think we have to two.
Okay. I will run through this, and then if you have specific questions, you can ask me. All right. The mechanics of the book are basically the formatting, the layout, the cover design, your book blurbs, and the metadata and keyword information. Of all of those, you can't say one's more important than the other because they all just hold a critical part of how readers pick books. The formatting. You have to look at the subject matter and the genre conventions. The fonts that you use for a mystery book are not the same as those you'd use for horror. Strangely Funny is its own animal. I don't even want to consider what all we've done with that. You want to use fonts that work together. Usually I look for 3 complementary fonts when I'm doing it that will fit with the genre and that will look attractive on the page together. And I think overall our books do have a nice look to them. The fan expectations, again, you're looking at what they're looking for in the store. If someone's buying a thriller, they're going to look for some dark, shadowy figure on the front of the book. Now, you could put something else there, but if it's a thriller and the fans are looking for it, they're not going to look at that book because it doesn't fit what they expect to see. So you have to really think about what you're publishing, how the fans look for it, what they recognize when they're looking at them. And then you get into the layout, the alignment, the margin, the trim size. I have a couple of different spreadsheet templates that I have set up just for doing books. And usually I start in Word, but eventually you're going to have to go to the spacing and kerning and create a grid for the book as to how it's going to look on the page. And that's where the real pain of authors making changes hits you. There is nothing like getting a book all laid out and having an author write and say, wait, I just got a new book accepted. Could I get this into the book? And I want to scream no every time Sarah asks me, but usually I'll do it. How the chapters are divided. There is a design to the page and how it looks for the first page of every chapter. It should be consistent through the book. And usually with publishers, they have a certain style that they like to use. And it absolutely drives me crazy when other people try to do that for me. I had an author in Great Britain who not only set up his pages with a particular style, it was a style that I didn't have the software to undo. So I either had to write him back and say, look, you need to create a whole new document, or we had to come up with some compromise as to what it was going to look like, because the particular software he had used wasn't even sold in the US. So just don't do this to your publisher, please. All right, cover design. I think you'll recognize the book I chose to talk about this.
Yay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now, if you notice, you're dealing first with the images and not just the main image on the page, which is the bourbon bottle and the gun at the bottom, but also the barrel house that's in the background of both back and front. The genre, you have fonts that mystery readers will find, compatible with what they're used to seeing. You're doing the front, the back, the spine, the bleed. You can't actually see the bleed in this because with PowerPoint I have to use the JPG and that kind of takes all the markings off. The back blurb, the ISBN, the barcode you'll see is missing here because this is the cover before it goes to press. And these days, the presses want to put that barcode on the back, so I simply leave them space to do it. The ISBN needs to be visible in a couple of places in the book, particularly on the front matter of your book. You want it to be that thing they're going to see fast. Because it's one of the ways that book buyers choose books, not so much the readers. They could care less what the number inside that book is. But they want to know, but the book buyers will always look for it. The sources of covers. We can commission them, which is what we do for our Three Snowbirds series. We have an artist who does cozy book covers for us. She designed some specifically for what I asked her for. Sometimes you have an author who provides it. For instance, with this particular book cover, the author's brother was an artist. And I didn't expect that, but he asked if they could send me a sample of it to see if I'd consider the cover. And it really worked well for the noir that he was writing. And then there's the off-the-rack ones, which was done for a lovely book called The Bastard Drunk. As you can see from the image on the cover, he's a pretty ugly guy. And what's more is he fits the description of the character so well that when I saw this cover, I just bought it.
And the author loved it.
And the author loved it. He thought I'd gone to a great deal of work for it. It was like, no, I was just looking for something that captured what I saw in his character. And I thought the cover did an excellent job of it. And apparently so did the people who reviewed it. So I think we did well with that one. But that's a matter of luck, usually, if you're looking at ready-made covers. And there's a number of sites that have them. And they range anywhere in price from around $30 or $40 if you can find one on sale to somewhere in the neighborhood of $600 or $800 for a ready-made cover that you have no control over what's on it except for what title they put there. Book blurbs. First thing is to know the genre that you're writing for and to give the readers what they want because they're looking for a particular piece of information. If it's a fantasy, they want to know
Does it have dragons?
does it have dragons? Is there a romantic interest there? The hook, something that's going to catch their attention. You don't really want to summarize the book in your blurb. What you want to do is give them something that entices them to look inside. And you want to aim for 150 words or less. You can go over that in some cases, but most of the time, less is more. Metadata and keywords. You've heard me use these a couple of times. And basically, the metadata is a set of data that helps you find other data. And the keywords are the things people type into the search engine when they're trying to find your book or a book like yours. Those keywords can be
Cozy.
than one word, or they can be something short like cozy. But chances are they're going to type in something like cozy mysteries with dogs. Or,
Enemies to lovers.
yes, enemies to lovers for romance.
I've seen that a lot.
But you need to figure out what people look for when they're looking for yours. And that's probably one of the most important things you can do if you're going to sell your books online. Then there are the reviews. Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, the online book club, NetGalley, you do have to pay for, but it allows a lot of readers to choose your book
And then review
and
it.
then review it. And those reviews will be posted on Amazon. So it's worth the money to actually get a lot of people access to your book. Reader's Favorite, which not only will do a review for you, but you can enter their annual contest with your book. And if you win it, there's a lot of advantages to it. The Midwest Book Review and the Indie View is basically, it was put together by Publishers Weekly, and it's a list of independent reviewers that you can query about reviewing your book. And you always want to ask them first if they'll consider it, and then what form of book they want, whether some people will only read a paper copy. But these are the ones I most use for them. I've never gotten Publisher Weekly to actually review a book, but one of these days I'm going to actually get them to do it. I do submit everything, they just don't review a lot. They get probably somewhere between 600 and 1,000 entries a day of people who want their books reviewed. I have managed to get one book into Library Journal. They have their own submission process. Publishers Weekly, I've included Book Life, which will review independent books, but again, you're going to have to pay them for the review. And in my opinion, it's worth paying them for a review of your book because you'll get the kind of review you get from Publishers Weekly. And unlike some of the other sites that ask you to pay for their reviews, these are strictly independent books. They publish a journal of those books they've reviewed and they send it out to libraries. And I've actually had library sales come through the book reviews that are done by Book Life. So, and they also will let us submit articles to them. So independent presses and independent authors can actually write an article for Book Life. And there's a list every month on their website of things they're looking for. I think probably the rest of them you're familiar with. If not, you feel free to ask me. I can tell you all about most of them. Promotion, trial and error. This again is something that Sarah wants to address
Am
most
I
of the time.
addressing it?
But she does a lot of our promotion for us. These are some of the sites that we use for it. There are a number of things I really like doing. There are some that I absolutely hate. When it comes to Facebook and Instagram and most of the social media, Sarah posts. There are only so many hours in the day, and I don't spend all of mine, posting to Instagram. Whereas she has followers just for her food porn. Or the various travel pictures she posts.
I post a lot of beach pictures.
When to hire an expert. Task you hate and can afford to pay someone else to do. For instance, I hired a publicist because I hate doing it.
Sadly,
Unfortunately, she died, so now I either have to hire a new publicist or do it myself. The task you don't have the skill to complete. professionally. I can tell a graphic artist what I want for a book cover and let them put it together. I don't need to actually go in and do it because I'm not a professional graphic artist. And you have to recognize what you're not when you're doing these. The tasks that you don't have time to do well, there are some things that you just simply, you have a clock running, it's got to be done by a certain time. Particularly things like reviews, because you have a window when you send it before the book actually comes out. And a lot of times that's 4 to 6 months in advance of the book. Some places you can do within a month or two, but you need a calendar. And if you're getting too close on time, get someone to do it for you. It's better to pay someone else than to not get it done.
Special thing about this.
Yes. With Dolichus and Mysteries, which is one of the ones Sarah was talking about.
Because, okay, first off, Dolichus rules, because they will do a lot of it for free if it's cozy.
Yes. They'll set up a blog tour for you no matter what kind of mystery you write, but if you write cozies, they'll do it for free. And that's a lovely plus to Dolichus. And Sarah said I needed to go back and actually
Let you
focus
know
on that.
They will do other mysteries though. It just will cost a bit more.
Yeah.
But they're very, very good. And also remember that our book came out in September of 2019. We did Dolichus in February and we got the spike then that we didn't get in September. I don't think it.
All right. Anyway, the last thing is the tasks that have to be done for someone else that's not emotionally attached to the work. And this is one of the things that's hardest when you're an independent publisher, but you're publishing your own work.
Mhm.
Somebody else has to look at it because you've seen it so many times that you
Yes,
don't
what's
see what's
bad.
wrong. So if there's something that you have to have somebody else do because they're not as emotionally attached as you are, hire them to do it. It's worth every penny. Anyway, that is pretty much the path we took and what we learned along the way. So if anybody has questions.
How do you balance running your own publishing company with doing your own writing? It would seem like how many hours are in a day?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is why, notice we list ourselves as a micro press, which is a press that doesn't publish more than a dozen titles in a year.
Okay.
And the reason is, if I published more than a dozen titles, which by the way, I've never done, 6 is about my limit,
Mhm.
but anybody between 1 and 6 books a year is a micro press. And that's where we'll stay as long as we're both publishing and writing, because we just,
Unless
you
got
have to
like
have a
business
balance of
partners or
time, and there's
something.
only so much that you can do.
Mhm.
We limit our reading period for novels to 1 month out of the year.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. And then are there, how do you work out your division of labor? Like, are you very good at some things and then your partner's very good at other things, or how do you do that?
You notice Sarah did all of the editing talk because I don't edit except for, I will do basically a content edit. I will look at it and see if you have plot holes.
Mhm.
Other than that, I don't edit.
Okay. Okay.
You often do the first read of a novel. though.
Yes, I'll do the first read of the novel and I'll tell you, you know, if something needs to be fixed, or
Mhm.
write back to the author and say, look, if you'll make this a little smoother or fix this problem, we'll consider it. But like I said, if it comes to line editing or proofreading or any of the editorial stuff that Sarah does, which is a lot,
Mhm.
it's not my problem.
Well, I'd also like to know, on a personal note, were the two of you able to get married?
Yes, we were.
Yay!
Congratulations.
We have one process.
Yes.
Very, very exciting. Yeah.
In 2003, when Canada, or when we got a civil union in Vermont, we honeymooned in Canada, and they had just legalized marriage.
Uh-huh.
So we went back to Niagara Falls the following year on our anniversary and got married.
Oh, that's very
It
lovely.
still wasn't legal here.
It still wasn't legal here for about, what, 4 more years?
No, quite a bit more. More like in the mid 20 teens.
But once it was, we had everything converted. And when Sarah's office said we're no longer honoring civil unions or domestic partnership agreements, you have to have a marriage thing.
Bing.
I shipped it to her. She sent it to them. Everything was settled within a day.
That's great. That's very exciting. Yeah.
Yes, it was. It was a long road.
So I guess you have to really like each other to do business together like this.
I have seen business partners that argued all the time, but
Yeah.
that wouldn't be us.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Frankly, if we have an argument, it's really ugly and everybody's going to cry.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is so informative. It's like getting behind the scenes of a production and seeing all these
Writing
things that
comments,
we don't know
events.
about that are going on behind the curtain. This is absolutely fascinating. So
Well, I will be forwarding Susan the presentation we just did so that you can have a copy of it. And
Great.
that way the email links and stuff in it you'll have.
Thank you.
All right. Anything
I have
else?
a question. I was just wondering, how do you all manage all the bookkeeping and accounting of the business? Because that seems to me to be the most complicated and or one of the most complicated and probably one of the most boring parts of the business, but it's an important piece.
For the month of March, Sarah walks on eggshells around me.
And April. Well, March and then April for
Yeah.
a totally different reason.
Yes.
Tax time.
Yes, all of the business taxes have to be finished in March. It's an ugly month, and it's all my problem,
Wow.
as is paying the royalties and that kind of stuff. I had, because we've done so many
No, you calculate
anthologies
the
now,
royalties. I hate it.
and we do I calculate all the royalties for everyone. And we went to paying once a year because the number of anthologies we've done has grown so much that I couldn't do quarterly anymore. It just ate up too much of my time. And it wasn't for that much money. I mean, if you're talking a book that was published 5 years ago, each author might have like 10 cents come for the quarter. And it's like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do this to tell the author that it went up by 10 cents.
yeah.
Is that true for all books or just for the anthologies, or do you focus mostly on anthologies?
The anthologies take the most time. The novels that we've done, it's still, I do it annually most of the time. It's just so many places are so slow to give us the information. Elaine waited for months for me to tell her how many books had sold through
Was it
through Ingram Spark,
Yeah.
because Ingram doesn't report regularly. They give me a report every 6 months.
Yeah.
And if something's published after, 1 month after that 6 months is up, it's going to go almost a year before they'll tell me anything.
Wow.
Then there's smash
So-
words, which you might hear about. What if something sells on there.
Yes, but it's just, there are so many different types of royalties coming from different places that keeping track of them is one of the biggest challenges. You would think for the same book, the royalty would be the same, but it's not.
Well, Sarah and Gwen, this has really been interesting, and appreciate you taking the time, and you've done an awful lot of work putting together a
Oh,
presentation. I thought you all were just going to sit there and chat with us, but I guess I should have known you'd be more professional than if they had asked me a question. But thank you very much, and we will keep in touch with you about coming up in November for the book fair.
Yes, that's still on our calendar to come up for that. So we're looking forward to seeing all of you again.
Yes, we will have a gay old time.
Yes, we will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has
Thank
just been
you.
great.
Thank
Thank
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.